Stories from Ukraine. We're back with our favorite panelists, I think the most popular ones for sure. Everyone loves our Thursday updates on the situation on the war on the battlefront with Glenn here and David Sims. So Glenn, David, welcome back. Things have slowed down in many respects, but also are going things are definitely moving in a lot of other respects. So, Glenn, since we last spoke, why don't you tell me what you think's happening and where do we stand in this war? It's certainly moved to a different phase.
It has. I mean, I think if you if you ask me actually what's happening, if I knew I could make a lot of money, because it's that sort of strange bit at the moment. I mean, around Kyiv, then basically the Ukrainians, I think they fought the Russians to a standstill, I think would be about the best way, and then started counterattacking, coming back bit by bit, and now on the northwest side, they were in danger of being encircled. And now they apparently have pulled back to in towards Belarusia. Now, whether they go all the way and regroup and then come back again, obviously, if they go all the way back into Belarusia, they're in safe territory because they're not going to get attacked there, so they can sort themselves out and come back again if they want to. So we're not sure what they're going to do, or whether they go back to Belarus and then go all the way around the side on the train down to Donbass and join the attacking force in Donbass. There's quite a few opportunities there, and we don't know what they're going to do. What we do know, which is really sad in itself, is that the Russian boys who were in Chernobyl, decided they were going to dig trenches. And so they disturbed all the radioactivity. And now a whole load of them have had to go back to into Belarus because they're ill, and they've had a pretty hefty dose of radioactivity. So that's not particularly clever. Apparently, one of them, on being interviewed about it, actually said he had no idea that they were in Chernobyl, and B, that Chernobyl had been a nuclear accident. Because it was 38 years ago, and nobody in Russia has been teaching about it in history because it was a bad time for the Soviet Union. So it's obviously been whitewashed. Anyway, so that's the northwest. On the northeast side, the Russians are still being held, and in a couple of places, counterattacks pushed back. Sumy stays as it is. Kharkiv's been subjected to some quite heavy shelling and missile attacks in the last few days. So they're actually getting pummeled a bit. But the troops, there are no Russian troops inside of Kharkiv. They're still round the outside. And Kharkiv is still open. My friend Dmitry actually left there by car today, so I know it's still open. And now below Kharkiv, the troops were actually trying to the Russians came out from Russia across westward and were trying to cut the supply routes from Poltava into Sumy and Kharkiv. Now the Ukrainians have actually pushed them back and have retaken the couple of towns that they got, and that was all in the newspapers today. Further down, the battle on the east, the Donbass, where the old trench lines, that remains still the hardest battles of all. And in a couple of places, the Ukrainians have been pushed back a bit, pushed back to like a village behind where the trench lines were before. But in the main, that is holding. Down south, they've still got this completely different sort of way of working down south. So they're still trying to push out, and they are pushing out the Russians a little bit by little bit. But behind the army, they're bringing in what you could class as Russian administration. So they've got police, Russian police. They've got mayors, and they've got National Guard who are coming in and trying to take over the towns and persuade everybody that they must become Russian, just the same as in the Donbass. Now what they've done, they've actually kidnapped, I think, about 12 mayors and replaced them with mayors of their own and people. But in the main, the Ukrainians are not enjoying this, and they're pushing back as often as they can. Now, the Russians actually wanted to buy off all the pensioners by offering them a 10,000 ruble pension each month. But of course, Russia's run out of money, so that's not going to happen. So the buying off, in fact, not only is it not going to happen, they now actually have financial difficulties in the Donbass itself. So the people that they're paying, the soldiers that they're paying, and the administrators that they're paying in Donbass may have to now be paid in hryvnia, the Ukrainian money, instead of Russian money, because the Russian money stopped. So this could actually be quite an interesting twist down there. Mariupol survives. It's completely trashed in the middle now. It's just a mess. But around the outside of Mariupol, where you've got smaller houses and sort of housing estates, then there's still fighting going on. And the Azov battalion and the Marines there are still managing to hold their own. Apparently, some ammunition is getting in and some supplies are getting in, but not much. Russia continues to bombard and attack Mariupol, the hardest of all the places that they're attacking. And I think that's probably it. Oh, Odessa remains open, although you can't use the port because the Russians have blocked the port with ships outside. But at least the city is still firmly in Ukrainian hands.
Glenn, thank you for that round the world tour on the updates, and we'll dig into some of those in a moment here. David, what do you have to add on the overall situation between last show and today?
Yeah, it's what I find interesting is the Russian story that changing, their talking points on what their strategic objectives are. And focusing this, it is the Donbass. That's what this has always been about.
Moving the goalposts,
right? Which is great. Great after you're getting beaten back, and you realize you're, achieving your stated objective is not going to happen, and it's certainly not going to happen without a tremendous cost. So just redefine my objective. And moving the goalpost, right? We change the nature of the game. So what I look at is, well, we know it's what we've seen really the past 48 hours is that's not really true. There are some Russian units that are, I'll throw some doctrine out here since I know you love going back to the doctrine, Sam. But
been out 8 years. I'm pretty pretty rusty on my Army doctrine, but I'll pretend.
Indoctrinated.
Yeah, but some units are conducting a retirement, right? That's the doctrinal term. Those units really don't exist anymore, right? There's some pieces of them, but those are being removed from the battlefield, right? And there's evidence of that. But we still continue to see evidence of units not leaving the capital region. Russian units not leaving. They're staying there, and they're continuing to defend. So why do you defend, right? We know what Americans defend and Brits, right, to resume the offense. But really you defend because you have to preserve. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's a Clausewitz definition, and I know Russians read Clausewitz. It's pretty all the time. Right. And it is somewhat of a stronger way of conducting operations, but it doesn't achieve a purpose. And that's the problem with the defense. It doesn't achieve a purpose, right? You cannot win a war from the defense.
Well, certainly the Russians can't. I think Ukraine certainly. I think the difference between the Russian situation and Ukraine situation is a lot of people assumed going into the war that a war of attrition would actually favor Russia. And I think what we're seeing right now is the opposite. The war of attrition is, every day this war goes on is a victory for Ukraine. So the defense in Ukraine is a lot more useful than it is for Russia.
It is, but they're still losing ground down the south. And therein lies the problem, is that if Russia digs in and goes for trench lines in the south, then a whole load more land has gone. And that would be a Russian victory. Even if they pulled out from the north and everywhere else, if they actually go for positional defense down south, a la Donbass, then they've added another chunk of land that's the same size as the Donbass was. So this is a very dangerous time for the Ukrainians, because they've got to start taking that land back, whilst the Russians are struggling. Because if they leave the time, then Russia goes for a trench line, then they can just stick any bodies into the trench line, especially then if there's a suing for peace or a ceasefire, and then that land is lost, and then it's going to be a really, really, really difficult political battle inside Ukraine of, do we accept this? Because if the West says, "Oh, good, the war has stopped, we got a ceasefire," Ukraine is in deep trouble at the moment with losing that land.
Yeah.
So this is politically a very extremely difficult and challenging time for Ukraine, and I'm not 100% sure that people have actually grasped this politically around Ukraine.
I think it's also the nature of the conflict on each side, right? Russia is projecting combat power. If you're projecting combat power outside of your borders, the defense is not going to work. And even on Ukraine, naturally, as big, the nation being attacked, they are in a state of defense naturally, but the counterattack and the offense always has to come out of the defense, to repel an enemy. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in some limited area. We're seeing it around the capital, right? And we're seeing it near Kharkiv, near Sumy a little bit, right? There are some limited counterattacks in Ukraine, but it's not.
But I think
not to a large scale.
But David, I think that the little bit that you're talking about reflects the natural doctrine of the Ukrainians. In other words, that small unit attack, small unit battle, they're good at.
Right.
So they can do small unit piecemeal going back bit by bit by bit by bit. What they haven't got is, and they haven't shown yet, is the sort of, the Rommel or Patton type maneuver of, fast driving, get round the back, capture 10,000 people. And maybe they haven't got the equipment to do it. Maybe they haven't got the units there to do it yet. But if they don't, if they go for this small unit attack, by God, it's going to take them quite a long time to work their way down back into Crimea and through Crimea and out the other side.
Yeah, and the way they're doing it, it's really, it's like you say, it's been piecemeal. It's been battalion and below, generally sized units, really companies and platoons, conducting limited counterattack. So when you're doing it at that echelon, I'm not integrating indirect fires. I'm not really conducting movement and maneuver. I'm certainly not conducting combined arms maneuver with armor and infantry and artillery and support. And I have, my air assets in a direct fire support, direct support to my ground forces. That's not happening, and that's really what needs to happen to have a successful counterattack.
But that's the sort of way that we've been brought up, that you have to do these things. I mean, in our sophisticated military, experience, but they haven't got that sophisticated military experience.
Right.
Because 8 years of trench warfare does not breed officers and soldiers for mobile battlefield. It breeds people who are stubborn, dour, take the punishment sort of defense type mentality, which is what they're showing in amazing quality at the moment.
It's not unlike what the American Army experienced with upwards of 20 years of counterinsurgency, right? And the ability to take a force and translate it to conducting high-end operational and strategic level military operations. So it's difficult. It's hard, and it requires resources and really a well-educated and experienced officer and non-commissioned officer corps to execute those kind of operations. They are complex,
which they have not got.
Right.
Which they have.
Well, there's no better teacher, Glenn, than war.
No, absolutely. But to learn, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
You don't learn by doing one thing. You don't learn something else.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see coming up is a couple things. One is Russia clearly culminated, as we discussed. They've completely exhausted their force's offensive capability, aside from limited areas in the south, mainly Mariupol, and I think a few other areas they've been pushed back around Kherson, and Kryvyi Rih and Zaporozhye. So really, their only offensive capability right now is concentrated on Mariupol and a few areas or pockets in the Donbass. And what I'd like to just bring up with both of you is this question of war aims, because someone asked me today, is Ukraine or Russia winning this war? Because you have media accounts of both. And my answer was very simple. Well, let's look at the war aims going in. And Ukraine's war aim was to survive as a country and to get back to status quo before 24 February. That's what they want to get back to, as I think a reasonable, achievable war aim in the coming negotiations. And Russia's war aim was completely unachievable with the forces they allocated, which is regime change, biting off at least everything east of the Dnieper River, and it's effectively a partition of Ukraine, conquest of the southern coastline, including Odessa, and regime change. And who's closer to their war aims? Probably Ukraine at this point. So Russia restating or stating a couple times, one from the assistant chief of staff. It was fascinating that Shoigu and Gerasimov didn't make this statement, but they let the deputy go out there and say, well, we're focusing on the Donbass. And then their peace negotiators in Turkey said the same thing. We're significantly reducing our combat activities in Kiev and Chernihiv as a sign of good faith, which I thought was an amazing.
This must be the first piece of good faith from Russia. Since, I don't know, 1917, I should think.
Yeah, I don't think they've ever had good faith in anything that they do. But it was an effective admission of the fact that we're not going to do anything on those fronts offensively. And the big question is, how much are they going to try and hold on defensively? Because if they pulled out completely, then Ukraine has a huge amount of forces they can now reallocate away from the defense of the capital towards Donbass and the south.
Can I pick up on your Ukrainian war aims bit, because I don't think many people actually realize that there's probably a fundamental difference between the war aims of society and the war aims of the government.
Yes.
I mean, the society wants this finished. They want Russia out of Ukraine. A large amount of people are not willing to accept. They're not willing to accept going back to the status quo, which is what Zelensky and his team seem to be pushing for, or saying that they will accept. And so if Zelensky sort of signs off on that, then there's going to be an extremely large amount of unhappy people amongst the activists in the country. Now, whether the activists are as strong as the grandmothers in terms of voting is a big question. but it's not going to be an easy ride within Ukraine for a war aim if Zelensky and his team actually start to sign something like that. One of the reasons being that nobody believes Russia at all, and the second one is there are actually a lot of people in society who don't believe Zelensky either, and this is quite a sort of, it's a challenging dynamic, because these things that people understand, lots of people saying that Zelensky's leading the country, whereas there are a lot of people inside Ukraine will say that Zelensky is doing what society wants. And those two things are not at all the same.
Mm-hmm.
So the war aims are still, I'm going to say under discussion on the Ukrainian side. And as we saw, they are very much under discussion on the Russian side.
Yeah. Well, actually, someone inside Ukraine might join us here in a moment, who's volunteering but also understands what's going on. So we'll see if Platon does join us here. But the big challenge right now, and you see these trial balloons going out from Zelensky's team, is what he's willing to negotiate on. Neutrality, not joining NATO, security guarantees in place of that. There was a discussion about a 15-year moratorium on the issue of Crimea, which Russia said, well, we consider the matter closed. And then he also talked about, when he was being interviewed by The Economist, understanding with The Economist that the Donbass was a complicated issue. So leaving some room for discussion on that. But you also have the hold on just one second. You also have the real, then he says, well, everything I'm going to do, I'm going to put up to a referendum. So therefore, I'm going to put this back into the people's court and see if whatever we agree to is actually going to get passed by national referendum. So I think there's really going to be a tough discussion on both sides, much more democratic, let's call it, in public in Ukrainian society than in Russia, about what can we achieve and what are we willing to pay in order to achieve that. So with that said, I'm going to bring someone here who's in Ukraine, good friend of mine, Platon, who's wearing a U.S. Army sweatshirt here. Platon, we've known each other for a while, and you are in Kiev, and I know that you're, well, why don't you tell us who you are and what you're involved in right now inside Kiev?
So basically, for the last 10 years...
Can we turn the volume up a bit?
Can you turn your microphones a little bit loud or soft?
Let me figure it out. No?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah. So for the last 10 years, I've been consultant.
So Platon, it's pretty hard to hear you. Do you have headphones that might work?
Let me just drop the laptop and I'll get my headphones. Just give me a moment.
Okay. All right.
While Platon is getting his headphones, did you actually notice that that Boris Johnson has said that he's going to provide some equipment for sort of counterattack?
Well, this is the big issue for Ukraine and the West right now. Ukraine can only counterattack with some serious equipment, which is planes, tanks, and armored vehicles, not just air defense and anti-tank missiles. And the equipment set that's necessary for the counterattack, as President Zelensky is starting to discuss, he said, "Look, just give me 1% of NATO's tanks. Give me 1% of what we could, what we know is already in your warehouse, your old T-72s, your old whatever. I mean, get these things out of the museum and give them to us." And that's a really important discussion for the West. Platon, I want to see how your headphones are.
Yeah, mic check.
Looks better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know me and Sam, we agreed that I'm going to come on Sunday to talk about something more political, but what I wanted to discuss now is actually stuff concerning military tactics and what you have been discussing.
Sure.
Because from my perspective, the fucked up shit is that basically we had NATO instructors inside Ukraine for the last 8 years who have been teaching us a certain way to fight, which is, and I might be wrong, but I'm not talking about the specifics of how they taught us to fight, but rather the specifics of the general situation that is in reference to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because what we saw in Afghanistan is that as soon as all the military support of United States government and the U.S. troops have just made it out of the region, the whole Afghanistan army just collapsed.
Yeah.
And so if we are taking in good faith that the United States and the NATO military had our best interests at heart and taught us how to fight properly against some kind of probable Russian aggression, then let us know what it was.
Yeah.
And depending on that, let us determine what NATO, quotes in general, and US in specifics, owes us, so to say, in specific military equipment.
Yeah. Well, this is what President Zelensky told The Economist in the interview, and he was exactly right. Does NATO want this to be a long war and a stalemate? Because that's what they're equipping Ukraine for.
Yeah.
Well, here's something to defend yourself, but we're not going to give you offensive weapons.
Because from my perspective, inside Ukraine, it looks like this. Go ahead, guys.
Kill yourselves. Yeah. Commit collective suicide because we don't care. And that's actually, I think, the big moral dilemma for the West right now. Well, let's be honest, Dave, Glenn. Nobody in the West thought Ukraine would survive the initial attack.
No, I did.
Yeah, but our own intelligence agencies didn't, right?
No, but they didn't. But they didn't bother coming to find out, did they?
No, and the policymakers for the West basically said, well, we're going to give you enough weapons so that when you get conquered, you can have a raging insurgency for 20 years.
No, the policymakers in the West were listening to Poroshenko telling them that they had the strongest army in the bloody world and everything was going fine. I'm serious. And they drank the Kool-Aid and believed it.
Well, I don't think the West...
I tried to tell someone in one of the embassies that this was not quite as it seemed, and I was dismissed. You know, dismissed.
Yeah, guys, but on the other hand, do you honestly believe that, just for example, do you honestly believe that when Poroshenko spoke to UK government or to US government, that the US government believed him more than their own intelligence?
Yes.
No, I don't think they did.
No, but they may not have done, but their own intelligence was saying the same thing that he was saying most of the time.
But we don't know what the intelligence was saying, because
the reports right now said that the U.S. and the Western governments did not expect the Ukrainian government to hold out more than a couple weeks. That was what the newspaper articles, which were leaked by our intelligence agencies, said in the New York Times, and I think that's what the policy's been made on, and it's clear that that's not the case. And the Western policymakers now have to decide whether they're going to support Ukraine with offensive weapons and, quote unquote, cross a red line, with Russia, or they're just going to fund a stalemate. So, hey, we'll back you on defensive weapons only,
Yeah.
but you have no ability to retake your own territory.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. My read prior to the start of this, coming from people I know and open source intel, it was a expectation that Russia would run through Ukraine, and that the best hope was to fuel an insurgency.
But let's be blunt about it, though. 8 months ago, nobody was even talking about Russia invading.
That's
Well,
correct.
we were since April of 2021, and
Yeah.
I think America has been warned since that moment that this was, Russia forces pulled back in April, but because Putin got his summit with Biden, but they left all their equipment. And the second time when everyone thought that this could happen, I think the general expectation, and sure there was debate, and Glenn, you know the Ukrainians better than most, but even you, Glenn, you had an article critiquing Ukraine's still Soviet legacy,
And
which
it's true. And if
Sure.
you go back and look at it, it's true.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, if we had not had that massive equipment from Russia and UK,
sorry,
then
U.S.
it would-
and U.K.
US and UK, if we'd not had that coming in,
and Russia. Sorry, Russia's done a great job supplying the
No,
Ukrainian army
and
too.
Russia's done a great job giving us tanks. There's no
Sorry,
question about
Glenn,
that.
I got to give you credit. That was actually Russia
spot on.
first, then the U.S., then the U.K., because that's probably the best help the Ukrainian military's had is first Russia.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But I mean, but if that massive equipment had not come, then it would have been a different battle. No question
Yeah.
about it.
But
Um,
is there a question that if that equipment didn't come, maybe there wouldn't be a battle at all?
Sure. Do you think Ukraine
in what
wouldn't have
way?
fought?
In what way do you mean that, Platon?
Well, look, and I mean, and Samuel knows, and he can verify what I'm saying. I'm doing all I can to supply our troops with everything that I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
And we're doing a tremendous amount of volunteer work. Just in the last 4 days, I have received and distributed more than 120 tons of humanitarian aid to all the cities in Ukraine.
Huge.
And all of that things are not going through official channels, but it's just through my friends, through the personal fundraisers that I gathered, that we have managed to organize with personal money. And I will be the first one to say that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is absolutely fucked up and totally horrific.
Yeah.
But just as a intellectual exercise, let's say you're Russia, and since 2014 there is a quasi anti-Russia forming in Ukraine, because the 2014 revolution was under the slogans that we don't want to go to Russia, we want to go to European Union, to NATO, to US, and so on. And so since 2014, you are seeing this buildup of Ukrainian military that West arms and arms and arms throughout the years. And within the last 1.5 years, we have received at least like 1 or 2 planes with military equipment a week. And within the last 5 to 6 months, we have received a couple of planes every couple of days. So if you're Russia and you might not know exactly what is in those military planes, you just see an armament of a neighboring country through the last 1.5 years.
But Platon, intellectually, I don't see Mexico worrying about US, and it's the same thing in the US. I don't see Mexico getting excited and trying to invade USA. I don't see Canada getting excited and trying to
Okay,
invade USA.
what if Russia was supplying 3 to 12 planes a week
Into
of military
Belarus?
equipment
Into
to-
Belarusia?
No, to Mexico.
Then there might be a bit of unhappiness in that if
Oh, yeah.
Mexico was against the US.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
But if Mexico says
Ukraine-
it wants to do something, then
but
you know,
Ukraine, especially during the Poroshenko times, Ukraine was extremely anti-Russian.
Yeah. Well,
Yes,
that was the origins of the war. Poroshenko took over in the middle of the separatist fighting that broke out in the Donbass, and yeah, I think Ukraine ever since has been, Zelensky wanted to moderate and make peace, but he even, Platon, you saw this in 2019. He was not allowed by domestic politics to make the concessions that were necessary to make peace with Russia, even though that's what he ran on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Lester's made a comment up on the top right.
But Mexico no longer claims Arizona,
New Mexico, Texas, and California.
Yeah.
But Platon, I understand what you say, but remember that it's Ukraine that wanted to come to the West. It's Ukraine that asked for the support.
Yeah, we did.
And from the beginning, it's Ukraine that asked for the. I mean, I was the first advisor into the Ministry of Defense when the war came. When the war started, I was asked to come. But the war started before I came.
No, of course. Look, I agree with you, and I hope we'll get into the political discussion with Sam on Sunday.
Yeah.
But the thing that I'm talking about is, NATO for the last at least 8 years, even longer, said that we are going to welcome Ukraine into NATO. And now Jens Stoltenberg says that perhaps it wasn't wise to promise something that wasn't achievable.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think you're bringing up a big point, and we'll get into this a lot more on Sunday, Platon, with you on politics and Ukrainian society. But
yeah, but to get back to the, I'm sorry, to get back to the point of this show, as my question is, given that the NATO instructors were training our army, I have a question. How are we supposed to fight? What's your opinion?
Well, did NATO properly train and equip Ukraine for offensive operations?
No, look, I don't know how they.
Well, I know how they were training them, and they were training them in small unit tactics, quite a lot of which are actually being done.
Do you think it is sufficient to repel a full-blown invasion?
But Platon, one of the big problems that you sort of missed at this point is that that actually for a long period of time that the Ukrainian army didn't want any more. They never integrated the American instructors, the Americans, into the system. It was always outside of the system.
But how could they?
So although let me finish. So although you were being trained by American instructors, often the people that were being trained went there to be trained. They weren't even the right people. That units were not often sent the right units. They were cobbled together units. So the Americans were trying to train a battalion, but that battalion was made up from 4 or 5 different organizations without the right officers. So when they went back, the people who were supposedly needing the training the most, which is the officers, were not trained. And then the soldiers were told by the self-same officers, you may have learnt to do it this way with NATO, but when you come back here, you do it our way. I would add that the written doctrine for the armed forces did not change to the doctrine that NATO was trying to teach, despite the fact that it was it was offered, it was written, and training pamphlets were written. Mushenko put those pamphlets in the bin. I know
So
this
who is
because
to
I
blame?
saw the pamphlets. I saw them. They were shown to NATO with great glee by an officer, who then went back, and Mushenko took them and put them in the bin and said, "We're not going to use this." So, you know what, NATO has only ever been on the sidelines. It's only ever been a school. It's the difference between a school teacher in school and the parents.
No,
If the
look,
parents don't actually want it, it's very difficult.
look, I'm not trying to.
No, I know you're not. I'm just trying to explain
Yeah,
how it was.
and I hope that's what we are doing here, because my question is, like, how the fuck did we end up here?
That's a good question, mate.
Well, Platon, here's how we ended up here. Ukraine significantly outperformed expectations. You were not supposed to win.
Yep.
You're not supposed to repel the Russians. You weren't supposed to successfully counterattack without the right equipment. And you've put us in a real pickle, because now we've got to decide if we actually want to back you with equipment that could end the war quickly, which might piss Putin off. I mean, that's ultimately where we're at right now. Ukraine just really screwed it up. You didn't follow the script. The CIA had a script for this, and you didn't follow it.
May I have one interjection? We were not supposed to win. By whom? By whose logic?
Well, our intelligence, Platon, obviously didn't give Ukraine any credit for your fighting abilities, nor did Russia.
You're not listening to me. You're saying you were not supposed to win. By whose scenario?
Well, I would say this: Russia right now is not happy with their ability to achieve what their strategic aims were at the war. So if I were to say what is winning, it's denying Russia the ability to have regime change and take all of Ukraine up to the Dnieper River and the south.
Well,
south
look, concerning Russia, I don't have any significant confirmation of this, but just from my political work, I have a strong suspicion that the advisors of Putin just fucked him up, because there is this mentality inside some Russian advisors that the whole left bank of Dnipro
was waiting for this,
of Ukraine, were waiting for the Russians to free them.
Yes.
And they would welcome the Russian army with open arms.
Yes.
Which was absolutely untrue, I would say, since 2016 at least.
Yes.
And honestly, I mean, one of the, I think one of the worst things that people who are into analytics, what they do is they start with a presupposition that Putin is insane.
Yeah.
But let's take it outside, and what if he's not? Like, what if
it's certainly a lot easier to assume. It's certainly a lot easier to write his behavior off if he is insane, than if he isn't.
This is concerning every regime. I mean, if you're telling that Trump is a Russian puppet and that he is insane, everything that he does just sticks to the point. If you're telling that Biden is insane and senile, then everything just welcomes it into the point. I mean, the presuppositions are one of the most dangerous enemies of analytics. Because as Arthur Conan, I was just remembered a couple of days ago, as Arthur Conan Doyle in Sherlock Holmes wrote that when you take out the impossible, what you have left is improbable. And given the facts, however improbable it might be, it can be true.
It's the fact. It can be true. Yeah.
And so again, to my question is, Glenn, given that you were on the ground, like, when was the fuck up?
In which okay, I mean, which bit do you think is messed?
Well, look, let's first agree on some things. So, since 2014, the West, together with so-called Poroshenko, but with Poroshenko's so-called patriotic government, were preparing for a possible attack from Russia. Right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not in the slightest.
What were we defending
They
then
believed
against?
that there would be no attack. They did no preparation whatsoever. I saw not one tiny bit in Ministry of Defence with the General Staff. I saw nothing at all in the committee meetings, the Reform Committee meetings, and I attended some weeks 4 or 5 of them, some days 3 in the General Staff.
Okay.
I saw not one tiny bit of evidence until about 18, when I wrote that paper in 18, in my Kyiv Post article in 2018. That was the first time that a lot of people actually even sparked tiny that Russia might actually be doing something. Until then, the army was, I'm sorry, but there was still a lot of people looking towards Russia, not looking towards the West in the system. And after 18, then, and that's when NATO actually started to get closer. A lot of the things before 2018, there's about 4 years, there was very little that actually went on properly. Sometime around about 17 is when the Americans actually started more serious training. So it's about 3 years with almost nothing happening.
Okay,
with people
so
coming here, talking, going away again.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get back a little bit into political side. So, given what was happening since 2014, given the Crimea annexation and the separatist regions of Donbass, like, how the hell did the Poroshenko government not expect that might happen?
Oh yeah.
That is a good question, and it's not one I can answer, but I can tell you that I saw no evidence as a military person of anybody taking it seriously. I mean, you're right. How the hell?
It's a matter, Platon, of expectations and then matching resources and training towards those expected.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I'm not like, sometimes it's not so important to answer a question than to ask it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been telling since 2014 that Poroshenko is in league with the war party, and he was one of the catalysts of what we're seeing today.
Yeah.
And even now, I don't know how much you follow the Ukrainian politics on Facebook, Instagram, and so on, but even now, the so-called proxies to Poroshenko, after every meeting and every negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, they're saying, whatever happens,
Platon, we have a very distinguished guest here, and I want to give him the platform. And Platon, thank you for joining, because I want to give you on Thursday this discussion. Sunday. But John Spencer came on, and John is.
Yeah, I'll shut up and just listen.
Yeah, we're going to let John go here. John, I know a lot of people were excited to hear from you, and I've got Glenn Grant on here as well as Dave Sims, both former retired colonels. But John, tell us about your background and what you do in urban warfare specifically, and why you are absolutely blowing up on Twitter, and your manual's been translated and distributed among the Ukrainian territorial defense and army. Just tell us a little bit about your background, what you do, because it's a pleasure to have you on.
Hey, thanks. It's an honor to be on, and I mean that. So John Spencer, I spent 25 years in the Army as an infantry soldier, both enlisted and officer. I finished out my career teaching at West Point for 4 years, tactics, strategy. helped stand up the Modern War Institute. And then when I retired, I continued working for them, and I still work for them with all disclaimers that nothing I say it represents
that
West
makes
Point.
any sense. Yeah.
Right. I started doing urban warfare. I mean, to be honest, I did 2 combat deployments to Iraq, both of them in the invasion in 2003 and 2008 for the fight for Sadr City. Really were urban. But I started academically in 2014 with General Odinero in the Chief of Staff of the Army Strategic Studies Group. Honored to be a year-long research group looking at megacities, and was the Army ready for that? That really started my intellectual journey into studying urban warfare. When I helped stand up Modern War Institute, that was what I was doing. And then for the last 4 or 5 years, I have a dream job, and I get to travel the world, study urban battles, write about urban battles. So on February 28th, when Russia invaded Ukraine, and then the Ukrainian people were asked to help resist, to help the Ukrainian military, which I immediately knew what the objective of Russia was. We all saw it happening. We saw an invasion. We saw an Iraq invasion style operation with the opening shock and awe, rapid movement of troops attempting to get
On the run.
The capital city. Yeah. Of course, they failed to do that, but there are radio messages going out in Ukraine saying, go out and resist. And that was really much the message they got. So I started tweeting from just an old guy who studied urban warfare, had my own experiences. Look, this is what I would do. I wouldn't just tell people to go resist. I would use the urban terrain because the urban defense is very powerful. Those tweets went viral. Then people, the way that Twitter works, the tweets would go away. So somebody asked me to take all my tweets and put them into a manual or a PDF. So I created with a spinoff. Most of you guys, you've been around for a while, know the mini manual for the urban guerrilla.
Yeah.
I used that term, threw all the tweets into really rapidly and just threw it out there. And then it got picked up by the Ukrainian government, put out through their websites, pictures of it being all over Ukraine, translated into Ukrainian. I've evolved it to trying to help more and more while I see things happening. And it's also been translated into Japanese, Mandarin,
Taiwan. They're all getting ready, and China's like, no, don't publish that.
Look out, Donbass.
Yeah. That leads me to today, really.
Well, John, I listened to your podcast where you talked about the Battle of Kyiv that looked like it was looming, and I also saw you on CNN the other day, or I forget which news channel it was on, maybe multiple ones, and you were talking about this diplomatic speak, which was covering for a military retreat. What do you assess is going on with the Russian army around Kyiv? And what are their movements saying about what the reality of the ground is?
Yeah, I'm actually a really big fan of Admiral Kirby as the Pentagon spokesman and the words that he chooses and everything. You don't believe anything a Russian says, believe what a Russian does. They're really on plan D of Kyiv, where they're being committed to attempt to take the city. The whole fake news about that was never their goal. It was a feint, all this. I mean, it's just straight lies and doesn't make common sense to anybody who's ever been in the military for a day. It was clear what they were doing, and every operation was in support of that.
Yeah.
Now they're going to pull them back because they're almost useless where they are. They're holding ground right now, so not very much is really left, as in moved. I do think they will move them. You've seen my most recent stuff, CNN 2 days ago, with my close friend Liam Collins, which was a freak of accident that CNN had us both come on at the same time.
You guys were really simpatico on that one. So.
Yeah. They can't take them out and rapidly redeploy them to the Donbass. We all know that. That's a pretty much fact. You got to rearm, refit, reconstitute.
Oh, sorry. You have to do radiation treatment too. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, radiation treatment.
I'm sorry to laugh at that because I feel bad for those soldiers. But man, what do you expect when you go to Chernobyl?
Right. and they were doing training. Actually, the Ukrainians were training there, right before the invasion. I'm like, is that right? They actually did
but to be fair, they weren't training quite there, and they were only training on sort of on the road, and in a safe-ish area. So it's a bit different from what the Russians are doing at the moment.
Yeah, don't dig in in a radiation zone. That's because do you think there's stuff under there that's contaminable? So
yeah. No, I saw a video today of a guy who just drove through with a detector and just driving through where not getting off the road, and the thing was going off.
Yeah. Well, John, let's talk about that's a really interesting point. And what you said on CNN really struck me was if they actually pull out forces and redeploy them, A, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
B, what do you think Ukraine's going to do? They're going to do the same thing. And whose forces do you think are going to get to the Donbass first, Ukraine's or the Russians, and what shape will they be in?
Yeah, I mean, the Ukrainians already have 1/3. It's like 10 brigades. I mean, it's not a small force in the Donbass. It's not a small army. Yeah, it's not a weak force. I mean, I'm real hesitant to say that if the Russians do pull back, then somebody could reposition it and send more Ukrainians. You could definitely focus energy, but we're in a real. I think for weeks now, I wouldn't loosen protecting of Kyiv or Odessa or any of the vital things that they need to hold. Now, I would love to see some support going to Mariupol to help. Weeks from now, when Russia reconstitutes or sends in replacements to the units already in the Donbass, there's my fear is the encirclement of those, not of a city, but the encirclement of those that very large Ukrainian forces there. But it would just be another war on the eastern sector with high casualties for the Russians, because anybody who's attacking is at the disadvantage.
Well, John, that brings us to, I think, the most important topic that I'd like to hear from you is the Mariupol fight and what is going on in Mariupol. And you actually had a much more contrarian view than a lot of the pundits out there, where you said the defense there is getting stronger because of Russia's destruction of the city. Talk about what your assessment of the fight for Mariupol is right now, and what, it's impossible to predict, but what are some possibilities to look for in the next week or so?
Yeah, so one of the biggest aspects of the paradox of high intensity combat in urban terrain is the more you destroy it, the harder it is to fight in it. It was that way in Stalingrad when the Luftwaffe destroyed 80% of the city before the close fight even began, because blown out. There's some really good documentaries even showing in Stalingrad when the bombs would blow inside buildings, any following bomb was much less effective because of the concussion, the way the concussion runs out. Now there's basically escape for it, so there's just less impact to the continued bombing. But rubble in itself is very. I think it was General Townsend came back from Mosul who said, basically in the last bit of the Battle of Mosul, it was near impossible to get the fighters that were inside the rubble. He literally had to take a bulldozer and bulldoze over them, because once you collapse a building and you create rubble, it creates natural bomb-proof bunkers that are stronger than real bomb-proof bunkers in some aspects. I think that's the level of fighting that we're going to see in Mariupol. If the defenders, I mean, you can't discount the fact that they've been sieged for about 4 weeks. So the level of water, although Mother Nature could help out with that with a little rain, some snow. But the Russians that do have an overwhelming number. So it's hard to guesstimate 10 to 12,000 Russian, mostly like Chechens and other people, but organized units, and about 3,000, depending on which unit you're talking about, inside of Mariupol. Those numbers aren't that supportive of achieving a quick victory, that's for sure. And they will pay a very high price, and I think you might have heard me say that, if they continue to push forward and go house to house, and their tactics are very poor from what I'm seeing. Even they're more tough units, whether it's Chechens or organized armor brigade or you name it.
So wait, you say that the Chechen TikTok videos, as cool as those look, that's not good tactics? Come on, tell me more.
or the tank by itself, with the awesome Ukrainian tactics of firing an in-law on top of it. Everybody argued in the video about the arming range of the in-law and whether it was effective, and we actually don't know if it killed that tank. But that a tank by itself is a dead tank.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and actually, if an in-law hits the top of the tank, the people inside the tank are going to be deaf for a little while anyway.
It's not a pleasant experience, I'm sure.
It's not a pleasant experience, that's for sure.
No.
Yeah, John, for me, I have two absolutely personal questions.
Sure.
Regarding me. First of all, as first one, which weather is better for the defensive? Warm, cold, rain, shiny sky?
Yeah. Cold, well, so that's tough. There's advantage and disadvantage for both sides. Rain, it depends on how good the other force is, right? In the defense, rain conceals the attacker's movement, right? Ranger school, if it's raining.
I'm personally talking about Kyiv.
In Kyiv, rain is the defenders what they need right now.
Okay.
Because it's hypothermic levels, right? So people are actually surprised at how warm it can be out, and people get hypothermia. Wet soldiers that are not that good at their tactics and not that well equipped. Yeah. That's hypothermia weather, to be honest. So rain is the Kyiv and the Mariupol's friend.
So rain is the friend of the defenders. Okay. And what about temperature? It's starting to warm up, but it's been an unseasonably cold spring. And actually, Glenn called this a few weeks ago on our show about frostbite. And Glenn, I'm sure the Russian army wasn't happy about your projections there. But how do you see the weather right now playing out over the next week or so?
Yeah,
Oh,
go
Sorry,
ahead.
Dave, go.
Go ahead.
I mean, you're getting this contrast time now, where it gets warm during the day and then it can still drop below freezing at night. So it's quite a challenging time for people, because especially if you start running around during the day and you get hot because you're running around because you got all your kit on, and then it freezes, and then your back freezes and everything else. It's not funny at all. And if you are one of those that's got frostbite, then you're not a happy boy at the best of times anyway.
So, John, as the weather changes in the next week, that's an interesting question. How do you, it seems like the Ukrainian forces, the Marines and the Azov battalion and the regular army that's in there, are they still fighting in an organized way? I mean, it seems like they're quite stubborn. What are you seeing on the reports out of Mariupol that you can glean from their fighting effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, I've not much actually, and I listen in on this group daily called the Walter Report, which includes people within the different cities in Ukraine. It's a real big asset to me. I haven't gotten much lately updates, so things that fighting will is everything, right? So they can. It doesn't matter if they got a knife; they can make Russians pay for keep pushing into Mariupol. I mean, I'd love to know what the the reports, like the ACE report. You're like, what's the ammo? What's the casualty? What's the water situation? To know the strength of the different units, and they all have the will to fight, and that's their biggest weapon, right? The fighting, and they've sending messages out. I really the news that buses are being sent to get some of the 160,000 estimated civilians out is a really big moment. If if the Russians don't target it like they have other humanitarian events, right? That will help them to help them fight.
More supplies for them. Yeah, more supplies for them.
More food and water that they're going to give to the civilians instead of themselves. A motivated soldier can fight in extreme conditions. I don't think that even the Chechens or even the Russian special forces have that type of will to endure the extremes. So that's heartening. But the paradox of getting all the civilians out is backing up the forces that are inside. I don't know if you've seen the maps of Mariupol, but there's a unit that pushed all the way to the theater inside, which is just baiting somebody to cut them off and surround them. Once you remove all the civilians, then you can back up when you receive a lot of casualties, which is exactly what happened in Chechnya, and then bring in bombing. I know Mariupol has been bombed really bad, but bring in extreme bombing if there's no civilians, and they can say everything that's left is enemy.
But on the other hand, and this is a question, doesn't it also give more maneuverability to our troops?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a paradox.
Yeah, and my second personal question regarding my safety personally is, what would it take for them to take Kyiv? I understand that it must be an overwhelming force, and they have to overcome our anti-aircraft defenses, anti-missile defenses, and all the, I don't know how much troops and spots we have around Kyiv. And even if I knew, I hopefully wouldn't say it out loud. But what would it take? I mean, just from your experience, because look, I've studied military tactics. I've trained with some of the best guys in Ukraine. I've been training in shooting and maneuverability and combat tactics for the last 12 years, not because something might happen, but because it's just something that brings me joy. So I understand some of it, but of course I've never served, and I don't have the full picture. So what, in your opinion, what would it take for them to take Kyiv?
Yeah, based on my research, they would need to achieve air superiority, step one, and then they would need over 100,000, 120,000 troops and special kinds of troops. They would need a lot of armor, a lot of engineering assets, so bridging and bulldozers, and then they would need a lot of infantry. I don't think in the battle, I don't think the Battle of Kyiv is going to happen. If it would have happened, they would need over 100,000, and they would need a very large, almost siege-busting force made up of a lot of armor, engineers, and infantry to push into the center. They didn't need to clear Kyiv. They didn't need to go house to house. They just needed to get to the government building.
Yeah.
But the city.
But they're not going to, John. They're not going to do it because the quality of the quality of the Russian side is just simply not good enough to actually to do this. I mean, they might level Kiev, the center of Kiev, to the ground, but at some stage, Kiev's a huge place, huge. They're going to run out of missiles and ammunition long before they actually flatten the whole of Kiev. And if they come in to fight,
and given
they're
that,
just not good enough. It's not good enough.
Great.
And given
it's
that,
11-year-old school children fighting against people who are coming towards PhD quality.
Yeah, but given that, my main fear in this situation is that they're just going to nuke us.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion on the political side. But I think that's
that's my fear. I'm not discussing it.
Yeah. No, I don't want to cut that off as not a legitimate fear, but actually militarily, nuking Kiev, I think, is a political non-starter for Russia because of
we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't
Well-
know, and the probabilities and other stuff is a political discussion. But given that this episode is concerning the tactics and everything, I'm saying that given some kind of military stalemate, and given that I'm in Kiev and I will not leave,
It's a legitimate concern.
that is my main concern at the moment.
Yeah, it's bombs and missiles for Kiev. If they try and get in there, they're going to get beaten again, because the quality of the boys is not high, and the second thing is that if they come back again and it's the same people, then they know what they faced last time. They're going to be deeply unhappy about fighting. If they're reinforced, they're going to be reinforced with people that are even less quality than the ones that they've been using. So then you make a reinforced unit of low quality plus lack of morale, and it's not exactly what you could call a fighting force.
Well, actually, Platon, this is really, I think, the point John was making, and he's made, is the battle for Kiev never happened. It basically was won. It was won on the suburbs.
Yeah.
In very tough urban fighting in Irpin, and is now being won in Bucha and Ostomel.
No,
really, that was the Battle of Kiev.
Concerning a conventional war, I would
agree.
Sure. And I'm not saying, and I'm not getting into the political discussion. I'm just saying that given the stalemate that they have in Kiev, and given that they obviously want to achieve something in Kiev, my main fear is just that they're going to jump to that.
Well, I would.
That would be
Go ahead,
the
John.
end of the Russian Federation as it exists in time. If they deploy a tactical nuclear weapon, it will be the end of Russia as a country.
Yeah. I think John, you've mentioned that, and it's really, if someone in the Russian, first of all, Putin has to order it. Secondly, a bunch of people, his chief of staff, his defense minister, need to let him actually transmit the order, and then Air Force pilots need to, with their own conscience, drop a nuke on Kiev. And Kiev is the heart of Russian civilization, right? That's a very emotional city for
Kiev
Russia.
Is the Russian civilization?
It is. It is.
I'm not talking about Russian as in
yes, Ukrainian, Kiev and Rus, for sure.
But I'm talking in terms of Rus, as in Russian generally, because without Kiev, there is no Russia, there is no Russian people, there is basically no Russia.
There's no Russia, there's no Ukraine, there's no
there is no, this whole Slavic region just doesn't exist without Kiev, because there have been 3 eternal cities.
Yep.
Rome,
Constantinople,
and Kiev.
Yeah,
that's it.
Well, Moscow they think is the 4th, but I would disagree.
Yeah, but I mean, Moscow doesn't exist without Kiev.
Exactly. Well, John, that was actually a really interesting theoretical or hypothetical. I don't think Russia can muster 100,000 troops that could do that today, and the Ukrainian forces probably could turn that amount of soldiers back. But if you were to rewind and you were to be an advisor to Vladimir Putin on the first day of the war or before the war, I know you could morally
say don't go in.
Well, if he insisted, John, and he held you at gunpoint and he said, "You're the best urban warfare specialist in the world, tell me what to do." So you're saying 100,000 troops, which would have been over half of his invading force, would have been needed. And was that ever feasible with the amount of troops he allocated? He just misallocated, tried to do too much, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, he had subordinate objectives. If I would have been advising, there would have been only 2 fronts. There would have been the Belarus through Chernobyl straight down, and then the Sumy Kharkiv fight. I would have left what I had in the east to hold. I wouldn't have tried to come up through the south or push any farther east. I would have massed power in that decisive operation, which is the convoy was the main effort. But then he tried basically like 7 fronts. It was just dumb. And I would have also used more air power. To be frank, I would have bombed a lot more than he did in the opening days to take out anything and everything around Kyiv. That was it. I would have, like I said, I would have marshaled more forces at those 2 points, left forces just to hold ground in the east, and then punched as hard and fast as I could in this. Even at this point, Sam, the U.S. military could not take Kyiv.
Whoa. Okay. That's a quotable we're going to put out on Twitter, and you're going to retweet that one, John. Say that again and tell me why.
Sun Tzu said the worst of all strategies is to attack a besieged city. That holds true to this day, and we have not done it in our history
ever. Yeah.
You know, we will rapidly get to urban terrain and we've had multiple meeting engagements. We've had rapid response to like the Battle of Way, where the enemy got in there and did a hasty defense. This is a multi-week long defense, more like the Battle of Mosul, which wasn't us. It was, to be frank, Iraqi security forces who expended their best units early on. And then it was basically a combination of militias backed by U.S. air power against an enemy who had 2 years, but an enemy that was a rookie terrorist organization that had no clue on military training. Kyiv is protected by a highly trained Ukrainian military supported by tens of thousands of civilians, where every street would be what we call non-permissive terrain. Could you do it with months with the U.S. military? One, we're a rule-abiding force. We will protect civilians even in our most lethal state.
Yeah,
that's why urban warfare is so hard, is because we can knock out, we can take out somebody on one floor in one room. That's the type of precision we have, but we're still going to respect human rights and not. So in order to take Kyiv at this point, it would cost even us a lot. And so then you get to the whole clause with what's the value of the objective to the warring size. In a defended, besieged city, it means everything to the citizens in Kyiv.
And Sam, I would like to make one more point and then cut me off because I have to get on a call concerning logistics.
Yeah, I must go as well. Hang on.
That I have to organize. But just one thought just entered my mind is, since World War II, this is actually the first conflict that we've seen in 80 years where a sophisticated army is fighting a sophisticated army. So
there's more fighting in the Battle of Stalingrad outside of Stalingrad than there was in.
Yeah, but also, I mean, given the parallels between now and World War II, I mean, the Germans were much better equipped than the Russians, than the Soviets. And the Soviet Union has won sheerly by numbers and by the will of the people who are defending their homeland. And right now, and it just occurred to me, I don't know why it took me so long. Maybe I'm stupid, maybe I'm getting stupid. Is that
see now, mate? See now.
Yeah, and this is the first actual conflict since 1945, where we have and more or less as well-equipped armies fighting in both sides. Because when we take all of the wars that U.S. has waged on Iraq, on Afghanistan, and so on, it was, I mean, guys, and Sam, you know how what gear do I have?
I wouldn't want to fight the Ukrainians for sure as a U.S. Army.
No. I mean, you've seen the gear that I have personally.
Yeah.
And I know how much it costs, and I know what I can do with this gear, giving the PVS, the the thermoscopes, the support of the drones, of the Air Force, and so on. And this is nothing like what we've seen like in 80 years almost. So just to take the emotions out of it, even mine, given that I'm in Kyiv, just from the analytical and from military theory standpoint, it's extremely interesting to look at it and to analyze this conflict in terms of how do you, and I think the war in Ukraine is actually should be one of the deterrents concerning World War III, because when we see that evenly sophisticated armies who are trained at least on the same level, I'm not talking that they're highly trained, but at least on the same level, and having a sophisticated weapons, this shit just gets too messy for both sides.
Well, John, I think you would say that this is really the urban conflict is really the future. I mean, it's been avoided at all costs, but it's unavoidable with the urbanization of society, especially in Europe. What does this say about the future of warfare in general? China, looking at Taiwan and everything else, how would you say that urban war has changed the outlook for great powers and powers all over the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. Every part of the world is different. Every urban area is different. Ukraine is very special, and it's, but it is symbolic of the future. There's no way to avoid the urban terrain. All roads will lead to urban. Ukraine just has the blessing that if you get off the road, you're going to get in mud, and that'll bring any military to a halt.
And we have tractors.
Yeah.
Combat tractors.
Third largest army in the world, Ukrainian tractors.
Yeah.
This hopefully wakes up the world that the future of fighting is urban. And I'll be frank, there's not many militaries around the world that really believe that. They still think that we should have an enemy-centric approach, and it should be about defeating the enemy in the field of battle. This is, and one of the reasons my manual has been translated in so many different countries is because now this is showing the world that it doesn't really matter how big your military is or how capable it is what's the objective. If your objective is to come into my land and take it, I don't need to destroy your military. I need to destroy your will to fight, right? Clausewitz. It's the will, right? So it's your political will. How much are you willing to pay for what you value as the objective? If the objective is to survive, I don't need to defeat the army in the field of battle. I need to defend urban terrain. I need to suck you into the death trap that is urban terrain, because you can't avoid it, right? You got to drive through it to get to where you're going. I'm going to just defeat you in detail. It's a scary situation, and hopefully it changes a lot. The world has changed, and hopefully Ukraine, I think, is fighting for all of us, but it's also showing the world, you better get ready.
Well, it's heartening to see.
Guys, I need to go.
Thank you, Glenn. And it's heartening to see John and David, the potential for small countries to repel much bigger ones that decide that for whatever reason they just want to change borders. Because I think in many ways we're really good in America about picking our enemies compared to Russia, and or they choose us and we oblige. But yeah, John, I think you brought up some great insights on the future of warfare, and really just a pleasure to have you on here and see your perspective. And I'm sure we're going to have short quotable videos from you to send out to your audience, because I really appreciate joining us. And we'd love to have you back. We do this every Thursday, John, at the same time, and would love to have you anytime you're ready to just share more insights. I know we've got some interesting cross currents of political and military decisions coming up. And, as always, what we do is try and highlight the political situation, the human refugee, the impact the war's having, and then obviously the military analysis. So you're always welcome with us, John, and I appreciate your insights. Any parting thoughts you'd like to leave?
I especially thank you.
Platon, who just by way of introduction, Platon is participating in the defense of Kiev by coordinating logistics. He actually, he and I have been friends for a while. I would not categorize him as some rabid warmonger at all. In fact, he till the last minute thought this was preventable. But for Platon, which we'll talk about on Sunday, the entire country is united in the defense of Ukraine, which is a remarkable feat. I never thought I'd see such unity in Ukraine, where people like Platon and everyone else I know are so united, and we're going to talk about that on Sunday. And I think that's ultimately, war is a battle of politics by other means, as Clausewitz says. And in that front, Ukraine has already won. And, John, your commentary on that is, oh no, we're going to start trading military officer bookshelves. This is going to, okay.
Okay, guys. Concerning the best military book that we have is actually, let me get into the, because as John knows, we do have to exert some light masking at night in the city.
Yep.
So I think that the book that comes before anything else, before Sun-Tzu or anything, in terms of actually not fighting any war, is this one.
The Federalist Papers. Well, that's what we'll talk about on the politics show, because as we discussed with Andrei Ligach the other day, Platon, and I'd love your feedback on this, Ukrainian parliament has passed more sensible legislation since the war started than they did, I think, in the last 30 years. So the government's finally doing their job when the war starts. So that's awesome.
We've been trying to get the government to pass this legislation for the last maybe 5 years, just my group. And they've passed in the last 3 weeks more than we've asked for the last 5 years.
Yeah. Well, John, your insights on urban warfare, you're becoming a cult classic, so it's a privilege to have you on the show. I'd like to hopefully drive through your neck of the woods on my cross-country trip, and really looking forward to having you back. Again, we're on every time on Thursday. You've got a standing invitation. Guys,
every show that I'm on, every guest, as soon as the war ends, I'm inviting everybody, and I'm organizing a huge bash down in Kyiv, so everybody's invited.
I will take you on. I will take you up on that. I have a very large travel budget, and my plan is to get into Kyiv immediately when you guys win.
Yeah, and I have a shit ton of drinking budget. So.
Hey, so John, actually, this is something I'll talk openly about, because this is part of my plan. Post-war, we're going to start a Ukrainian history staff ride business. You and I, John, you're invited. We'll set it up on the ground in Kiev. I have my apartment there, and I would love to share the lessons of the world on how small countries can beat the largest superpowers or regional powers, whatever you want to call Russia, about to be maybe no power, in skillful use of urban terrain using John's manual. So
let's do it.
Love to have you on that. All right, guys. Well, hey, thank you everyone for joining. It was a privilege to share this with you. This is brought to you by the Borderlands Foundation. Any donations that are sent benefit a full-time staff of refugees that help Ukrainians who are fleeing the conflict internally and externally. And if you enjoyed this and want us to keep it coming, please donate so we can keep doing that. So thank you for everyone.
Thank you for your support from Kyiv. And guys, we even given all the political shit, we really appreciate the unity of the world around Ukraine, and it does help us fight better, feel better, live better, and survive this situation with the most dignity that we can.
Yeah. Well, that's why we always love to have someone from Ukraine leading the show. So thanks, Platon, for joining us. And we'll certainly have you back on Sunday for a detailed discussion of the Federalist Papers and how Ukraine can become a model democracy. Maybe even show the United States a thing or two. I think that's what's actually about to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited by that.
Sure.
So,
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.